So happy to share today. I'm going to walk you through a little bit how this started, which is the Envision process. We're going to talk about our next generation community wildfire plan and what we've got done so far. And then I'm also going to share a bit about our all lands recreation plan because there's quite a few intersections, as it turns out, between those two plans and also those two plans and the agricultural community. So with that, um, just so everybody knows where Chaffee County is, in case you might not have been able to put your finger on it on a map. The map at lower right shows where we're at, kind of the heart of the Rockies, we call ourselves. County of about 1,000 square miles with roughly 20,000 people. 80% of our lands are public lands. And those lands have seen a lot of change, I would say, in the last decade. We've had a spruce beetle epidemic that has come through the county, resulting in about 85% mortality of our spruce forest. We have seen outdoor recreation use grow at about 15% a year in the years coming up to the pandemic, and then just more after the pandemic. And that also is having some real impacts. And we're seeing a growing population as well, and more folks moving into the WUI. So all of those things combined back in 2017 to make a group of local citizens say, hey, we really need to be more proactive about community planning and about thinking about what we want this place to look like in 20 years, and then consciously making decisions to make that happen. So a group in 2017, and I love this story, a group of 8 community members got together, and Commissioner Greg Felt and I co-led that, but a bunch of fabulous people, and said, hey, look, let's do some community visioning and some planning together. We had a grant from the Lore Foundation that helped support that initial planning, and we were off and running. The Chaffee County Commissioners convened the effort, which was called Envision Chaffee County, and we ended up engaging, over 1,600 citizens in this process. And what those citizens did is they created some very compelling visions that have turned out to be pretty sticky for the future of this community. 4 of them, and 2 of them are seen here, and maybe they resonate with this group as well. They certainly do for me as a Colorado native. So one of the visions was the idea of having forest waters and wildlife that are healthy and that are also in balance with outdoor recreation use. A second vision was to have sustainable agriculture, maintain our beautiful agricultural rural landscapes, and keep our development focused in and around towns. So we measured how we were doing on both of these with a series of metrics and also with a community survey. And what we found is that we weren't on the track to have those things really happen in our future. The health of our forest is in decline, as it is, I think, across the state. We did a wildfire survey. I'll talk about more later, but when we asked folks in the wildfire survey about their perception of forest health, the majority of them saw it being in decline. And when we asked why, what we heard is beetle kill and the threat of severe fire is the top concern. But right behind that, and only by maybe an inch, we heard concern about the impacts of recreation use on the landscape as well. We also heard from our community during this process that 97% of people, 97% say that agricultural lands are important to their quality of life. And so the vision that you see here, in any case, we found we weren't on track for those visions. So the community got together through this process, and we created the Envision Community Action Plan, which is 40 big projects designed to help make sure that we have this future that citizens want. One of the big projects in the Envision Community Action Plan addressed a serious question of how do we fund all this stuff. I mean, it's great to have all these program ideas, but if you don't have a funding source, the possibility is that nothing happens. So very quickly, in fact, in 2018, so right on the heels of the Envision planning process, the ink on that report was no sooner dry than citizens put a measure on the local ballot. Basically, citizens were saying, hey, let's tax ourselves and tax our visitors to do this stuff. Let's all pay for it together. So we put onto the ballot with our commissioners 0.25% countywide sales tax. It's a pretty cool, innovative finance measure we call Common Ground, and it supports 3 things: forest health programs planning programs and projects that support forest health and fire resiliency, programs that support sustainable agriculture, and also things that support management of the impacts of outdoor recreation to our watershed. This passed, and it passed without a sunset, which is pretty cool. It currently raises about $1.5 million a year. One of the things we said is that we wanted to leverage that investment, and build on it to get more with other matching funds. And what we've seen in the first 3 years is that invested fund dollars have resulted in about $24 million of total investment if we look at the matching funds coming in. So this has been a real success story that has helped put wings underneath our wildfire plan as well as these other critical needs. A second super important program in that community action plan was the idea of what we call the next generation community wildfire plan. So we had a wildfire plan, but it was about 10 years old. And to be honest, I think it was sitting in somebody's desk drawer, and it was not particularly actively being used by very many people. And so we said, let's take a next generation pass at a wildfire plan. Let's get the community involved and really pull them into the planning process. Let's have them prioritize what they want to protect. Let's use the very latest in geospatial modeling to pull all this data together. Let's get all the latest data on how fire wants to behave now. For example, now that 85% of the spruce forest is dead and dying, let's bring that all together and let's make a next gen plan. So we've done that. We had fabulous support along the way from a lot of partners, including the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute at CSU, who did the modeling. And what came out of this process was a bunch of things. It's interesting that in working to plan, you often build community. We had amazing participation in this. The community absolutely seriously concerned about wildfire. In the midst of this process, we had our first type 1 fire here in Chaffee County called the Decker Fire, which maybe ramped up interest even more, as you might imagine. We had, this is led by the Forest Health Council, which includes 35 leaders from 19 different organizations. The process engaged about 1,600 citizens. As I mentioned, we used spatial layers to identify the values at risk, but first we let the community prioritize them through that wildfire survey I mentioned. So we asked citizens, what are the things that you most want to protect from a severe wildfire? And this model reflects those in this order. Citizens said the first thing they want to protect is the lives of our firefighters. So emergency ingress and egress to make sure those folks can get in and out safely gets a lot of attention. Citizens next said they want to protect water, especially drinking water, but also the health of the Arkansas River, which is the most rafted in the world. After that, critical infrastructure like cell phone towers. Nobody wants to be off of Facebook for too long these days, I guess. Followed by homes, followed by wildlife, interestingly enough, and then by recreation assets. So the spatial modeling was about identifying where all of those things are in granular detail, putting those together with models of fire behavior, fire intensity, fire probability. And then we also added in this next generation plan another layer that I think is pretty special, and that is looking at what we can do about it. So we also modeled treatment across the county and what it would cost to treat each acre and how much those treatments would reduce risk. And of course, as you all might imagine, that if I'm treating here in my backyard where there's a road and it's fairly flat, that's relatively cheap. If I get up on these steep slopes in the county, it gets real expensive real quick. So all that factored in. And so what came out of all this is this cool map that you see here on the right. I would say if you took this to the grocery store, half the people in line would recognize it. It's become pretty well known in the county. We call it our bang for the buck map. And the big realization that came out of all that modeling, and this is a huge one, is that if we treat just 5% of our landscape, 5%, we get 50% of the risk reduction to those things that the community prioritized. And so that's what we're doing. The red and orange layers on the map at right are that 5%. That is about 30,000 acres on our landscape. So when we signed off on this plan in 2020, just 2 years ago, a little less than that actually, we said let's have a big, what we call a big hairy ass goal. Let's go for treating 30,000 acres in the next 10 years, which will cost about $45 million, but not any acres. Let's treat this right 5%, and let's reduce risk by half. So we are marching forward and doing that. And I think this whole concept of treating the right acres, and not just acres, as connected, cohesive, cross-jurisdictional fuel breaks is part of the magic that we're working on. Another part of the magic is that this is all led as a collaborative. So the Forest Health Council worked up this plan, and they continue to engage quarterly and daily, I would say, to lead implementation of the plan. As I mentioned, that's a group of 35 leaders representing 19 organizations. We have all of our power providers are part of that council as an example, as well, of course, land management agencies and counties and all that. So that's a super functional body that's really helping move this forward. And what's come out of that in the first, I guess we're about a year and 9 months into our plan. We do annual reports on our plan, by the way, so it's all transparent and everybody can see if we're doing what we said we were going to do or not, including us. What's come out of that is an amazing series of collaborative projects. We have about 15,000 of that 30,000 acres now in the pipeline in some form, either NEPA ready or moving towards readiness on the private land side. About 10,000 acres of that 30, by the way, is private land. And so one of the cool projects that we started off with, and this is just emblematic of the kind of projects we're doing here in Chaffee, we call Methodist Front. So if you look at the picture on the screen, you'll see Methodist Mountain there, and you'll notice that there's kind of some smudgy stuff in the air. That's actually smoke. And interestingly enough, this Google image was taken at the end of the Decker fire. So what you see there is smoke from the Decker fire, a major wildfire that resulted in the evacuation of part of our town of Salida in the middle of the night, one super windy night. Fortunately, there were not structured losses or loss of lives in town, but it sure was a wake-up call. So the Methodist Front project connects the perimeter of that wildfire across U.S. Forest Service lands here, along BLM lands, which are shown here, and this also you can see is a power corridor. So the power providers, this is a WAPA line, engaged in treating those lines as well. It connects onto a piece of land here that actually is a conservation easement owned by the gentleman there at right, Art Hutchinson. Colorado State Forest Service has been doing the treatment there, and they've just been doing awesome work that Art is thrilled with. He's gone from thick pinyon juniper so thick that nothing grows under him to now a beautiful mosaic of patches of pinyon and patches of meadow that are going to be a lot better for his cows. They're also going to be a whole lot better for wildlife, as well as wildfire. So a lot of benefits. That treatment connects on to city lands. City of Poncha and City of Salida both engaged in this, in treating on their lands. And then it wraps back up around Poncha Pass on the agency lands. So all in about 8,000 acres of treatment planned here, but not any treatment. These are high priority acres, and we're working to make a contiguous fuel break that protects what folks love the most, including this river and water and infrastructure and lives and all that. So that's the kind of thing we're doing. We have a series of projects like this lined up really from north to south in the county. The other thing we wanted to do is we didn't want the community just to be looking at the agency saying, hey, let us know when you guys are done doing your work. We want the community out there engaged in getting themselves and their homes ready for a fire. I mean, Phil, as you mentioned, that wildfire in Boulder, I mean, just crazy, happened fast. We know that could happen anytime here. We're working to help citizens know it, and they need to have their homes ready in a condition that they can have the best probability of surviving. So we wanted to empower people to treat themselves. We've done that with a cool program that we call Chaffee Chips. So Chaffee Chips goes to 3 neighborhoods every year, and it offers a couple of things. Colorado State Forest Service goes out in front. Actually, Envision goes out in front and does the little groundwork, connecting people. Colorado State Forest Service offers some information on how to treat around your house, kind of what to cut and what to do. And then we invite folks to go ahead and cut their own stuff and bring it to the street or the road. And then we offer 3 days where we come and take that stuff away. And that some of that's through chipping. Again, Colorado State Forest Service here on the upper right with a giant chipper, taking care of materials on site. And we also have purchased 3 of these big trailers for Chaffee County Fire Protection District. And so they show up and they load the slash. It goes to our county landfill. We have a giant grinder at our landfill. It gets ground into chips, and then those chips are available for the community to come back and pick up for whatever projects they have, such as trails. So that's been crazy popular. In year 2, we found out that we needed a Mini X to load these trailers because all the volunteer firefighters were getting sore backs. So we got that purchased for this year's program, and it was a big improvement. But that program's treated about 1,500, picked up about 1,500 slash piles and helped about 800 people get their homes in a safer condition. And then on the side of that, and we haven't even tracked that, these trailers are available anytime for citizens for just $50. One will show up at your house. It'll park there for the day, and you can put your slash in it. And they're almost continuously in use. So how many piles we picked up is that kind of follow on? I don't even know, but all this is making our community safer. We also in the wildfire plan said, hey, let's get more Firewise. Let's try to double the number of Firewise communities we have. And we've done that already. Actually, by year 2, we now have 6 Firewise communities, and we're working to build more. And it turns out this Chaffee Chips has been a great entry to getting people thinking about that, and also thinking about doing bigger scale treatment on their land. So all that's been awesome. I mentioned Common Ground. Common Ground's been the seed funding that's been there to help support Colorado State Forest Service and Chaffee Fire and others, and to help us get other funds to support these programs. We've invested, Common Ground's invested about $5 million in the wildfire plan to date, and that's been leveraged, or will be leveraged, to about $22 million by 2026. So we're psyched about that. This work is all happening cross-jurisdictionally. I mean, it was pretty cool at Methodist Front State Forest Service. I think they had a big masticator there. They ran it on private lands. And then next it's going over to BLM lands. So the ability to go across borders, which fire loves to do, is a big part of our program. And then finally, wrapping up the wildfire thing, the other big challenge that we had here in Chaffee County was a mechanism to pull all these different funds together and to pay contractors out of a single bucket. So we have that $22 million represents a lot of different grants, some private funders, some businesses have come into the mix. We needed a way to put all of that into one bucket, and then to let out contracts where contractors could treat, essentially from my backyard here on private lands up onto the forest all at one time, so that we can be efficient and we're not mowing and remobbing contractors all over the place. And so that it's, contractors can make a decent living here as well. So we invited the National Forest Foundation to come help us with that. They graciously have complied, and they have created a body that we call the Upper Ark Forest Fund. That is the entity. They are the fiscal agent, and that entity is going to manage cross-jurisdictional treatments and the funds and help us bundle them up and put them on the landscape efficiently. Whew, so that is kind of a wild trip through our wildfire plan. And I'll catch up with my notes here. I did also want to talk a bit about the Chaffee County Outdoor Recreation Management Plan. So as I mentioned, when we put the wildfire survey out, we asked folks, what do you think is the biggest threat to our landscape? And wildfire, no doubt, was number 1, but much to our surprise, number 2, and not far at all behind wildfire, was people. And we had a little space in the survey where people could write in like what they're concerned about, and we got maybe 300 really spicy things in there. About the way folks are using the land. It's not really a pushback against growth, but it's a serious concern about the impacts that visitors are having on the landscape because of the way they're using the land. And so we already had this on the radar in the community action plan that we needed a all lands recreation plan. We took that on about 3 years ago. We started. It was a 29-month process that engaged over 64 different organizations for input, and it was just signed in June as the Chaffee County Outdoor Rec Plan. And this is a plan that covers everything from downtown to the top of our 14ers. It is truly an all lands plan. The citizens again set up the goals for this plan. They said, look, we want a plan that does three things. That first of all maintains the health of our natural resources, coming back to that vision of healthy forest, waters, and wildlife. We also want to retain, we have awesome outdoor recreation experiences here. We want to keep those exceptional quality. And then, of course, we want to sustain the economic benefits of outdoor rec to our economy. It is our second largest driver. About 33% of our economy is rec. So we wanted all those things. And the challenge to all those things has just been the rate of growth. The graph here shows in 100,000 acre area of our county where we have good data, the rate of growth in overnight campers and in OHVs on Memorial Day as one thing. And you can see that the growth is almost asymptotic in some cases. Tremendous pressure coming on the public and private and town lands. Like we did with Envision, we said, hey, let's check in to see how we're doing on these three things at the front of the plan. And if we're doing great on all of them, then we don't need to do much. But if we're off track, we do. So we love this kind of tool in Chaffee County. This is our Chaffee County Recreation Report Card. This is, there's nothing like getting grades on what you're doing to get people's attention. So for each of those three goals, we gave ourselves a grade. This work is driven by the Chaffee County Recreation Council. It's a body like the Forest Health Council. Again, a team of 16 leaders, I guess, in this case, from all of our towns in the county and the land management agencies. They set up metrics to measure these things in repeatable ways. And we gave ourselves grades. And you can see here that on the economy side, we're doing pretty good. Although there's a little bit of a yellow light here where we found out that we did a survey for recreation. We had 3,800 people participate in that survey, folks from 41 states, actually. So this is great data, not just from residents, but also from visitors. What we heard in that is that 70% of folks feel like the benefits of outdoor recreation growth are no longer outweighing the impacts. So while the economy is growing on a basis of this, social license to keep doing that growth is not. So that's the C that you see here. On the healthy forest, waters, wildlife, and working land side, you see we have a grade that you want to bring home to mom. Some of that's related to dispersed camping, which I'll talk about more in a minute, but you see the grade here also on agricultural operations. So we did a whole separate survey out to our agricultural producers. And we asked them, you know, how is recreation impacting you? How are tourists and visitors benefiting you? Are they having negative impacts and how much? What we learned from that survey made our jaw drop a little bit. We learned that our ag producers are experiencing about $100,000 a year of direct cost in damages related to outdoor recreation users. And that goes from, you know, fences being cut to gates being ripped out to stock tanks being used for target practice. And a lot of emotional damage that goes with that as well, right? Where our ag folks just feel like it makes me emotional. They really feel like they're experiencing kind of death by 1,000 cuts. So we're working to, we recognize that as an issue. That's a D. We also recognize that a root problem in all this is down deeper in the report card, which is that as this recreation use has grown, the actual dollars that our agencies have to manage recreation has decreased. And on a per visitor basis, it's actually decreased by almost 10% a year. So from 2016 to 2019, we got 40% less dollars per visitor than what we had at the beginning. And so that lack of resources to manage the impacts is a huge part of the problem, as well as the infrastructure. So that's kind of our current state in recreation. And I think emphasizes the need for action. And if I just dig a little bit into one more of those, you saw one of the F's on our report card has to do with dispersed camping. So dispersed camping is where you can go out and camp wherever you want for free. I think it's kind of been a cool way of the West. I grew up as a kid camping that way. But what we see now, we actually created an app with our program where citizens can go out and collect data on campsites that's consistent. The agency is also engaged in that. We collected data on 2,800 dispersed campsites in Chaffee and nearby in Lake County. We found that those campsites together have 3,500 gallons of trash, 550 piles that we recorded of human waste. And they're also associated with some real issues like what you see in the picture here, which comes back to wildfire. This is a campfire that escaped its ring and started to light up the trees adjacent to the campfire, an abandoned campfire. So that the number and the size of dispersed campsites has been increasing by almost 13% a year. We're saying that rate of growth is not acceptable. It has a lot of impact as well on our agricultural producers, where they're losing some really nice grazing forage and finding that their stock has a hard time getting to water sources and such as well because of this camping. So all that's kind of a downer at the beginning, but you know what? We're a community that works together pretty well. And we think we can flip this on its head. We do believe we can change these trends together. Our rec plan is designed to change these grades from what they are to A's, which would mean they're all improving. And the plan basically looks like this. It's got 4 big elements. We're looking to keep it clean, keep it fun, keep it wild, and keep it going. So on the keep it clean side, we're working on all lands camping management. Both the Forest Service and the BLM are getting started on NEPA to look at how they might manage camping in more sustainable ways. We're also looking with the towns and the county at camping. So it truly is an all lands approach. We're looking at getting the right infrastructure in place, which looks like everything from restrooms to some fencing to keep folks where they belong. We have identified some what we call community concentration zones where we're encouraging new rec development to be, and we're pretty actively discouraging new rec development in areas that are our best wildlife habitat and our best grazing. We got a lot of education and enforcement going on. And then a big focus here on the rural landscapes, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. But the big goal that we set for rural landscapes is that we want to flip that negative $100,000 of cost that recreation users inflict on agricultural operations to a net positive by 2026. So we got a whole series of strategies in place to try to make that happen. And then in terms of keeping it going, we're looking at every way we can think of to try to fund better management and maintenance, including funding. We got a Rec Rangers program where the community funds some rangers on the forest to help get all this stuff in a different shape. And then just moving towards wrap up here on the protecting rural landscape side. So I said we want to flip a negative $100,000 to positive. And the question is, how the heck do you do that? This ties back to that vision, of course, of sustainable ag lands. But there's a couple of things we've already done. One of the other Envision projects was the idea of a thing we call the community conservation connection. That idea is essentially 5-year conservation agreements with landowners where they agree to keep their lands in agriculture. Even if they're already in an easement, they're saying we're gonna keep production going on them, and they get paid a small amount per acre to do that. So that's like a little help. We're working, I guess, big picture. I said, we're experiencing death by 1,000 cuts, but we're trying to turn that into hope by 1,000 helps. So here's some of the helps. We got the Community Conservation Connection. It's up and running with Central Colorado Conservancy and the Upper Ark Conservation District. Natalie Aleo with them has just been doing a bang up job getting that up and running. We also have in the Common Ground grants, a series of grants that go to agricultural producers to do improvements, like piping ditches or finding ways to enhance their lands. So we got that happening. And then this next year is stuff we're working on. We're working with the agencies and ranchers to get to a list of infrastructure that would help um, decrease the impact of rec users. And that may look like turning gates into cattle guards. It may look like fencing off stock tanks. It may look like moving stock tanks or creating different water sources, um, all that kind of stuff. So that's the ag rec infrastructure. We're not sure how we're going to fund that. So if anybody has ideas on how you fund that kind of a program, I'd love to hear it. We're looking at changing our county zoning and code so that agricultural operators would be able to offer camping on their lands. And then we're working with Hip Camp to see if Hip Camp can provide liability insurance and all that to support it. And we're also working with, we have a all lands camping coordinator now. We're offering to ag somebody to help them design the sites and put in fire rings and stuff. We think that might be able to provide a revenue stream for those who want it. You know, maybe it's a couple $1,000 a year, maybe it's 10 or 15, but all these thousand help. Big picture, we actually had a rancher dinner up here a few weeks ago, and Governor Polis showed up and we were talking about this stuff, and he did an awesome job engaging. But one of the really big things we were talking about is how might we brand high country beef? How might we build additional local processing? And there's been some interesting articles out recently on this challenge with processing. And how might we market that to our residents and to visitors? Because we think most people here would be willing to pay, you know, 20% or 30% more per pound if they knew that it was supporting what they love. So we'd love to, we're working to figure that one out. That's a big thing, big hairy thing we're at the front end of. We have a program called Burning Together, where Chaffee County Fire Protection District is going to work with agricultural operators using those trailers that you saw before to help remove some of the piles of stuff that happen along ditches, you know, especially at culverts and all that, so that those don't work as ladder fuels. But they're also going to set up a program to help agricultural operators burn ditches more safely, because we know in the current fire climate that what used to be a kind of no big deal, go out on the weekend and burn your ditches, is now something that could turn into a big deal. And then Upper Ark Conservation District has a cool program they're working on. I made up this name. I call it Waterworks. They're working to help agricultural operators maintain their ditch and water infrastructure, which of course is critical to those lands. And then finally, we have, coming back to the wildfire plan, we have this Treating Together program where we're working to offer landowners that are in those high priority zones that are part of fuel breaks. We're putting together funds to treat on their property for free as fire breaks, and that'll also improve their habitat, just like what I described with Art Hutchinson. So that's another thing that we're providing that I think helps our local ag folks. So again, working here on Hope by 1,000 Helps. Wrapping up the rec plan, what we're really looking to do here, and it's a big ask, honestly, is to create a shared recreation culture where instead of just thinking about using the land, we're really thinking about protecting natural resources to keep it all clean, fun, and wild, not just for us, but for the folks to come. So with that, that's some of the things we're working on here at Envision Chaffee County. All the stuff I talked about today, the reports, the surveys, the campsite collector, all that stuff's available for free if anybody wants it. It's at our website here. If you just go to the website and go to our tools, you can find it all. And we hope this will, all these tools will spread across the West, and we can do this for not just for here, but for Colorado as well.
Well, that's a lot, Cindy. That's
so there you go.
Incredible amount there.
Yeah.
Fantastic information. This is one of those that I'm really glad we recorded, and we'll be posting this, as I mentioned, because there's a lot of food for thought here. One of the questions that I had, and by the way, to everybody on the call here, this is a great time, if you have a question, to go ahead and put that question in the chat, and we'll try to get to that. But so don't be shy, just go ahead and put the question in if you have one. In the meantime, I wanted to know, how did you start this process? I mean, you obviously, you and the 7 other folks identified, you know, we've got some challenges in this county, and we really would like to address them. But what are the first few steps if there are others in other counties who would like to do something similar? What do you need to get right, and how do you begin?
Ooh, that's a big question, Phil. So we, you know, it was interesting here. We actually started out, the Lore Foundation reached out to us and said, "Hey, we're looking at funding some community visioning processes." And that just happened to come together with what we were thinking of, that we needed one. Um, the first thing we did, and maybe the most important of all actually, is that we did a deep dive on the stakeholders in our county when we started this. We actually put a big map up on the wall. This is an industry tool we use that said, okay, who's going to be interested in this work and who's going to support it and who might resist it. Um, and and we listed all those people up on a board and we sorted them out. Um, one axis of that graph was influence and one was interest. So we were looking for people that are really interested in this that also have a lot of influence in any direction. And all of those people, almost 100 of them, we reached out to one-on-one before we started and said, "Hey, we're looking to start this. You know, what do you think? What are your thoughts about the future of Chaffee County, and what's your vision?" So that relationship building at the front end and understanding who's the who, leaders of organizations and all that, I think was a really critical foundation that we built. And then we did a lot of work reaching out to those groups where they already meet as we built this vision. Um, just bringing the community in, I think, has been a key part of it. And then that combined with a consistent process of setting visions, measuring them with report cards so that we see how we're doing, creating plans to change the grades if we don't like them, and then being super transparent with the community about how it's going. We do an annual report on our fire plan. We'll do an annual report on our rec plan. We do that for Common Ground. So that's kind of that ongoing transparency. Look, community, here's what you wanted. Here's what's happening. Here's what's working. Here's some stuff that isn't. Um, and keeping people engaged through that way, I think, has been a few of the key pieces of it, Phil.
Yeah, question on funding. And of course, that always comes up pretty quickly from Nancy McCormick. There are many millions of dollars available after a tragic wildfire, of course, but it's much harder to find mitigation funds. And that is so true ahead of a fire. And we all know that those mitigation funds are desperately needed. Do you have any suggestions there, asking for a small rural mountain neighborhood with lots of dead trees standing, but not enough capital to address proactively? And I'm sure her question represents a question that a whole lot of people out there have.
Yeah, so I think the first part of that is having a community wildfire plan, whether it's at the scale of the county or the scale of your neighborhood's an important first step to help tap funds. I think we've tapped a lot of funding sources. Colorado State Forest Service through their Fort Warm grants, which are forest. I don't know. I don't know if Adam's on the call. Somebody on the call might be able to remind us what that acronym is for Fort Warm. But anyway, Colorado State Forest Service has a number of grants that can go to that sort of work. We've tapped those. Natural Resource Conservation Service has grants to help landowners with that. Yeah, thanks. Somebody put in the chat box, the Forest Restoration and Wildfire Risk Mitigation Program is what that's called through Colorado State Forest Service. Again, NRCS has some funds. We ourselves as a community went for a thing that's called a Regional Conservation Partnership Program grant through NRCS. Those are tough because they take 100% match, but we were successful in one of those. So that's another source. Our local ballot measure has been, I mean, that's a big heavy lift, I know, but having those local funds has really helped us compete for other funds as well. So those are a few thoughts.
You mentioned that ballot measure. Talk a little bit about that in terms of, how you sold that. I mean, that is a heavy lift, and that's really a big tax. A 1/4% is not small, but folks voted for it. What was the percentage when you finally tallied the votes? And how much did it cost? And how long did it take to kind of educate folks on what it would do?
Yeah, those are great questions. So trying to think through those in a reasonable sequence. So I think the fact that ballot measure was referred by citizens coming out of this all community planning process was part of the element of success. It passed by 52%, so it wasn't a landslide. I would say that we were up late on election night. watching results for sure. We had professional polling that was at about 60%, but it was interesting. Our local newspaper editor actually came out against the ballot measure, in part, interestingly, because of the support for agricultural lands, which he perceived as kind of subsidies for agriculture. So that was a bit of a headwind for us, but we put on a professional campaign. We had support from the Trust for Public Lands. In that, they were awesome. They helped us out at the very front end with professional polling to get a sense of where we were and to help us tune the language in the ballot measure and to understand, kind of what we needed to have in it to help it be successful. They also helped us out with 3 rounds of professional flyers out to the community. Of course, we had a very organized letter writing campaign to the local papers and editorials and all that kind of stuff along with it. I think all in that cost us about $60,000 on our end. And then TPA provided some match for on their end for some of that professional polling. And that, that all was a whirlwind. We decided to put the thing on the ballot. Gosh, I think it was in May and it was the November ballot. So that all happened kind of fast.
Yeah, I'm just amazed you were able to get that done so quickly. I think probably that's like record time ever.
I actually think, just building on that a little bit, Phil, I think one thing that you asked what helped it pass, and part of it was wildfire. This is only one of 2 or 3 ballot measures I know of in the Western United States that supports fuels mitigations, wildfire protection specifically. And I think that is what helped it to pass in our community, because we all only have to look out the back door or look at the news from Boulder, the year before on the big fires to realize that things have changed and there's a real sense of urgency in the community to do something about it. So I think that's the part of this thing that made it quite attractive to people. And that clarity of, look, we're not going to go try to treat everything. We're like treating the right things, and it really is going to make a real difference.
Yeah, I'm sure that was key, that you very clearly articulated that message and exactly what you were going to attack or try to improve upon. You mentioned that Chaffee Chips program. I'm wondering if that is a place, if somebody in a county wanted to get started with something. That sounds like a really effective program. You said you'd addressed 1,500 slash piles that you picked up. You've helped 800 residents, and it's really been popular. The trailers that you have can be rented really inexpensively and used, and apparently get a lot of use. How much is that program costing on an annual basis? Any idea?
That's a great question. Not that much. So we purchased the 3 trailers and the midi-X. Some of that was with Common Ground funds, and some were with Colorado State Forest Service 4-Warm grant for the capital. So there was that capital cost at the front end, and then on an annual basis, we run all this with Envision's got a coordinator that helps, and then Chaffee Fire puts resources to it. Colorado State Forest Service has part of a staff, and I haven't seen all those numbers tallied up, but I would guess that's maybe in the range of 60 to 80,000 a year, which is really all staff time to coordinate and chip and drive trailers back and forth and that kind of stuff. Our volunteer firefighters drive the trailers, so they get a stipend for a day when they're doing work like that, but it's pretty small pay compared to what it's worth. So there's a fair amount of volunteer sort of service in that too.
Yeah, that seems like money well spent. And it does seem like that's been a real catalyst, based on what you said, for starting the conversation with folks about, especially larger landowners, about maybe a more extensive wildfire mitigation work on their land.
Yeah, absolutely. It has spawned, conversations both for communities to become firewise and for people to say, oh gosh, that looks pretty good. I am now ready, since I'm in one of these treatment areas, maybe to treat all my acres and more fulsomely. It has been a great opening into getting people having the conversation. I think people have also done, because it's a neighborhood event, it also has had a real nice effect of creating some peer pressure. So you see your neighbors out there, dragging their stuff out to the curb, and you wonder what's going on, and maybe have a conversation, and neighbors are encouraging neighbors and helping each other, and all that's pretty helpful as well.
Yeah, never underestimate the power of peer pressure for sure.
Exactly.
Question from Bobby from Colorado Association of Conservation Districts. And Bobby asks, please share with the group how local and all Colorado state conservation districts can be involved in wildfire risk planning. I know you mentioned Natalie Aleo local at the local office has really been involved in this process.
Yeah, I think it would be awesome if the conservation districts were engaged. Um, I think when wildfire planning has happened, you could act as participants. What we found here locally is that the whole thing really needs a catalyst in Chaffee, and we're spreading our wildfire plan right now to Lake County. We're actually almost done with similar planning in Lake County. But in that case, Envision's acted as the catalyst. But a lot of places don't have a catalyst. So it could be that the conservation districts could be that in, I mean, it takes somebody to organize the community and to get folks engaged in it to do this next generation sort of process. So I could see anything for the conservation districts from a role in, really leading the process all the way through participating, and in the middle, I mean, I think there's a great role for them to be reaching out to landowners that they engage with anyway, and talking about mitigation on their lands and helping them find funding for it. And again, of course, NRCS has some fabulous grants for that as well to help folks, including treatment on their land. So lots of ways they could be engaged, I think.
I wanted to ask Cindy about the program that you've created to try to help ranchers kind of stay on the land and continue using their land for productive agriculture. You're paying them, and I know this is kind of just getting started, you're paying them a per acre fee, and that is for some period of time, maybe 5 years. Is that flexible, or are you just kind of setting that as the time frame and then review when you reach the end of that? Or
We're asking ranchers to sign a 5-year agreement where they agree that for the next 5 years, they will keep their lands in agriculture. It's kind of like a conservation easement, but just for 5 years. They get paid on a per acre rate that I think, I might not have these numbers exactly right, but it's around $17 to $23 an acre. It varies. Irrigated acres are worth more than acres of moose pasture or antelope pasture, maybe be the better one. Dryland acres. And the idea, I mean, part of the idea is just to help them with a little boost of extra revenue. We have seen some of them engage with after that first step and have interest in conservation easements as the longer term thing. But we also honestly heard from our agricultural community that a conservation easement, like they're willing to make a decision about development for their generation, but doing it for all the rest of the generations to follow is maybe a little much for them. So they really wanted a shorter term tool to be able to step into that, and that's what the Community Conservation Connection provides.
so, Cindy, we've got another question, kind of related back to an earlier one, and really this is I think a challenge in a lot of mountain towns where you've got a lot of second homeowners that are coming out from time to time, and or maybe they're using it for Airbnb or whatever. But these are folks that are not necessarily as engaged. Some are, but many are not because they live elsewhere. Those folks are a little tougher to engage just because of the distance and not being at the local grocery store and not seeing what's going on locally on a day-to-day basis. How do you connect with those folks on this issue? Because as you said, fire loves to go move across boundaries. It doesn't really care who owns the property.
Yeah, that's a really critical point, and we've seen, it was interesting. I was with the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. We saw some data just a month ago, maybe, that showed how the big fires in California react to different treatments. And for sure, the patchworks of treatment that's perfect, a fire just blows right through. It really does need to be, in those cases, it really does need to be connected. So a super important question. We do have that issue. We're tackling that by trying to engage into the homeowner network. What we find is that a lot of these neighborhoods have, if not a formal HOA, some sort of connectivity where people tend to know each other and they can track down their neighbors and reach out to them. And that's been our most effective thing of trying to pull those non-resident landowners into the mix. Our ability in these big fuel breaks to offer treatment for free, of course, is, that's a pretty good deal too, even if you're not here. Cause I think sometimes if you don't have a home here, thinking of spending money just on the property is maybe hard to swallow. So those are a couple of ways that we've taken it on. But really, neighbors chasing neighbors. I mean, in my neighborhood, I happen to be in one of these fuel break areas. I have 16 lots in my neighborhood. Only 3 of them have houses. The rest are mostly non-residents, but we have a list of all those folks and we engage with them and we're working to pull them in for to treat on their lands all as one swoop. So we're asking people to get engaged with their neighbors and help us figure it out.
Speaking of that, you mentioned population growth and that your population has grown. I just checked the state demographer's office numbers and they said it indicated Chaffee County's population has grown by about 1,500 people in the last 10 years, which is a lot for a little Chaffee County, and that you'll add about another 3,000 by the year 2050. So you've got a lot of those folks that want to move into what's called that wildland urban interface or WUI area. How do you
Right.
get ahead of that? Is there a need to look at your land use codes? Do you really try to reach out through real estate agents to make sure those folks know what they're getting into and have some responsibility up front to address any wildfire risks that might be on that property?
Yeah, those are good questions. I think I would say Eagle County has done a great job with their real fire program and reaching out through realtors and really working that angle. We haven't tackled that here yet, but they've done a great job in creating essentially a premium for homes that have defensible space on the real estate market, which is awesome. We're looking here to tackle that more in the land use code. We have a countywide land use code update that's coming starting later this year. So I think we'll see at least a first phase incorporated in it. We also have had, as part of our wildfire plan, we had a couple of urgent things that we're working just to change immediately in the land use code. One of those is that part of our code actually allows driveways to be built that are too narrow and steep to get a fire truck up or maybe out if it needs to go out fast. And we are also we're looking to change that, and we're looking also to put in a requirement for reflective post on all the driveways. Our agency staff did find during the Decker fire that having those or not having those really influences their ability to get people out safely and consistently. So we got a couple early wins we're working on, and then I think we're going to tackle fire resilience a bit in our land use code update.
Well, Cindy, you have done such a fantastic job, so informative, and we really appreciate it. We will have to wrap it up. We're kind of at our end of our time here. So just again, want to say thank you so much for taking your time and sharing all your knowledge on this. And again, folks can go, you can just Google Envision Chaffee County, I think, or Common Ground, and you'll quickly find their websites and a lot more information. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's all out there and all the tools and the survey and everything's out there.
And again, as I mentioned, we'll be posting this webinar on our website at agwaternetwork.org so you can check back because there's a lot here to absorb. And also I wanted to mention on our website especially for conservation districts or other folks who are having meetings or want to kind of broach this subject with their constituents. We do have a short video on our Ag Water Network website on wildfire and watershed protection. This video is ag oriented. It's 5 minutes long. And it's a real helpful resource just to kind of get the conversation started, especially as it pertains to watershed and stream management planning. But it looks at just how wildfire risk planning and mitigation can kind of get started in a community. So with that, again, thank you so much, Cindy. Really appreciate all the information you provided. If anybody has any questions or comments, follow-up things, please go ahead and email those to me at phil@brinkinc.biz. That's phil@brinkinc.biz. And with that, we are going to close this webinar. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Phil. Great work.